Hello, this is the first lecture for Ancient and Medieval History in the week of November 2nd, that's a Monday or yesterday, through November 6th, which is Friday. Today is Tuesday, November 3rd, Election Day. That's the flag. Where we left off was in the first known law code, which is the law code of King Hammurabi of Babylon. Hammurabi's code can be basically summed up as: among equals, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a life for a life. If this seems barbaric to you, that's because you come from a cushy 21st century perspective. The law code of Hammurabi of Babylon is about limiting justice to the equivalency of whatever it is you were found guilty of. So if you're found guilty of breaking somebody's arm, the worst that will happen to you if you do it to a social equal is the executioner will go up and say, "Nothing personal, buddy," bam, and break your arm. It limits justice. Getting rid of that crazy constant escalation that the law of family has, blood calls out for blood, where you are constantly trying to communicate with violence and terror. The king's justice says, no, we are going to limit justice. Now, it's among equals. Hammurabi's code, like all law codes, is not simply about aspiring to this ideal that we call justice. It is also about protecting the social order, because the social order is what allows civilian life to happen. And civilians are the people who grow the food and pay the taxes. Without civilian life, no food, no taxes. This is true now as it was true then. Social order is one of the main purposes of government, to preserve social order, the rule of law. Remember, we come from the most primitive law of force. Might makes right. Me strong, you weak. You do what I say or I pound you. That is replaced by the law of family. Blood calls out for blood. You gave my little sister an Indian burn, I'm going to break your arm. Therefore, your brother's going to snap my arm clean off. Therefore, my father's going to kill your brother. The escalation of the law of family that leads to feuding. The law of the king says, I'm the one with the army, I make the justice, you come to me for justice. But the law of the king is always trammeled by politics. So the kings appoint judges, but the law of judges can be widely dissimilar. If you've got a merciful, bleeding heart judge who wants to show how kind and forgiving he is, you're going to get a much lighter penalty than if you're with Carlo, the hanging judge. So we end up with the law code, the code of laws, a set of standards of evidence and sets of penalties based on particular crimes, and Hammurabi's code is the first. So an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a life for a life among equals. If you mess with somebody above you in the social order, prepare to die, or to be maimed, tortured, amputated, whatever. If you mess with somebody lower than you in the social order, you'll pay a fine. That's life. Deal with it. To us, it may seem like an eye for an eye will make the world go blind, but in fact, it's merciful compared to what other law codes there were. Now, the other great ancient law code that comes down to us comes from the book of Genesis, from the Hebrews, and that is the Decalogue. The Decalogue is the Greek word for 10 words, the 10 words of God, or the 10 commandments. These 10 commandments are actually 14 separate commandments, and if you look in your notes, you will see that the Jews reckon the commandments one way, Catholics and Lutherans follow the Augustinian method, and Protestants and Reformed Christians, as well as Greek Orthodox Christians, follow the third way. What I am going to do is I'm going to follow the Augustinian or Lutheran reckoning, because that's the one that was at play in the Middle Ages. The introduction to the Decalogue, or the Ten Commandments. And God spake all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God. The first word of God, or the first commandment. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a graven image. The second commandment. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. The third commandment. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. The fourth commandment. Honor your father and your mother. The fifth commandment. You shall not kill. The sixth commandment. You shall not commit adultery. The seventh commandment. You shall not steal. The eighth commandment. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. The ninth commandment. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. And the 10th commandment, you shall not desire anything that is your neighbor's. Now, that is what I learned growing up Catholic. But you'll see there's a different emphasis in the various interpretations. The Orthodox and Reformed reckoning, and God spake all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God. That's the introduction. The first word, you shall have no other gods before me. The second word, you shall not make unto yourself a graven image. This deals with the iconoclasty in both the Reformed Church and the Greek Orthodox Church at times. The third commandment, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. The fourth commandment, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. The fifth commandment, honor your father and your mother. The sixth, you shall not kill. The seventh, you shall not commit adultery. The eighth, you shall not steal. The ninth, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. And the 10th gets all the coveting together. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, and you shall not desire anything that is your neighbor's. Now, the Jewish reckoning, which I suppose I could have read first as it's the original, the introduction is, and God spake all these words, saying, the first commandment, I am the Lord your God. The second word of God, or commandment, you shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a graven image. The third word, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. The fourth, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. The fifth word, honor your father and your mother. The sixth, you shall not kill. The seventh, you shall not commit adultery. The eighth, you shall not steal. The ninth, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. The 10th, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, and you shall not desire anything that is your neighbor's. Now, here's the thing. This is obviously a religious code. This comes from the Hebrews, whose one guiding central characteristic is their monotheism, their Abrahamic faith in Yahweh, in the Lord God Almighty, and in I am who am. Now, even though it's a religious code, there's a reason why it's on the walls of many courthouses built before the 1960s and 70s experiment with de-Christianization in this country. Every commandment, from honor your father and your mother, you shall not kill, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness, you shall not covet. These commandments, which is, depending upon how you count it, half or more than half of the 10 Commandments, are necessary for any civil society. They're good rules that even most atheists would say, yeah, honor your father and your mother. That doesn't mean be slavish to them, but it means honor them. They brought you into this world, and they chose to keep you and raise you and love you the best way they could in their imperfect humanity. Don't kill. Now, the Hebrews and almost every other Christian of the mainline sort interprets you shall not kill as you shall not murder. Murder is something you choose to do as an individual. Killing in the service of your country in war is not murder. Executing capital condemned death penalty criminals is not murder. The Hebrews executed criminals, Roman Catholics, Lutherans, Protestants, Reformed Christians executed criminals, Greek Orthodox Christians executed condemned criminals, and they all were in societies that waged war. There are some non-structured Christians, the Amish, the Mennonites, Quakers and Shakers and so forth, who are Christian pacifists, and there were some Jews who interpret it this way as well. They tend to withdraw from the world and say, You shall not take a life under any circumstances. That means no death penalty and no war. It's not easy being a pacifist. On the one hand, there's the temptation to say, yeah, I wouldn't want anyone to take my life. I don't want to take their life. I'm going to be a pacifist. But follow the logic to its conclusion. Unless you're a psychopath, you don't want to kill anyone. Soldiers are not happy with having to kill people unless they've gone a little native in the spirit of battle. They do it because they have to, not because they want to. And why do they have to? Because if they don't fight, their society, which they value, will be conquered. If you're a pacifist, that means you have to refrain from violence when your family is under attack, when your home is under attack. You have to turn the other cheek. That is a high moral standard that most people, including myself, are simply not capable of. I don't even want to be capable of it. It's a personal thing. You can decide for yourself. You must decide for yourself. But understand what pacifism is. It is a refusal to use violence under any circumstances. That's big. And anyone who can really pull that off, even if I disagree with them, I admire their dedication to their purpose. I have to. It's admirable. There's no question. So, honoring your parents, refraining from murder, refraining from theft, refraining from lying, that's bearing false witness, and refraining from envy, which is covetousness. These are good social rules that almost any society would benefit from if the people in that society diligently practiced. So, one of the neat things to me about the Ten Commandments is that they are, at least in the second half of them, fairly universal rules for a functional society. That's why it's on the walls of our courts. That and the fact that our society, like it or not, comes from the Judeo-Christian tradition, and from 325 AD, when Constantine establishes the Council of Nicaea, up through at least the 1970s, we were proudly a tolerant Judeo-Christian society, not a society that pretended towards an absolute religious neutrality or an official atheism. Okay, trade. Trade is the exchange of goods and services. Trade is necessary because autarky, A-U-T-A-R-K-Y, which is utter self-sufficiency, is something that pretty much no human being has. Societies can try for autarky. Usually it leads to war. Trade is better than what it replaced, because what it replaced is theft. Theft is, you've got something I want. Give it to me. Trade is, you've got something I want. Let me work out an exchange that'll be mutually beneficial. Maybe I've got something you want. Maybe we can do an exchange. That's trade. In fact, without trade, the world becomes a very anarchic, a very violent place. But with trade, the world becomes much richer. Richer in goods, because the goods are exchanged. People who have too many radishes but don't have any plums are able to exchange radishes for plums. Or radishes for money and plums for money, and then you can buy some radishes or plums. Trade also enriches the world because it's peaceful. Those people who equate corporations and the free market economy with communist oppression are missing a basic point. When you're dealing with government policy, you are dealing with the coercive power of the state. The government will make laws that if you don't follow, you will be punished, including prison, re-education, or worse. Nobody has to do business with Coca-Cola. Nobody has to do business with Disney. Nobody has to do business with any particular corporation. There are always alternatives. If there aren't, the government should get involved in breaking up the monopolies and the trusts like they did in the early 20th century, late 19th century. Google, just for an example. You don't want monolithic companies having the power of governments. So one of the things that I, as a conservative, acknowledge that government can be useful for is if a single company dominates a necessary business, that company should be broken up into competing companies so that they don't have an equivalent power to government. Trade is peaceful. Trade is what enriches people by giving them what they need, and it's what makes people behave well. Because if you want to trade with other people, you'd better be polite and reasonably nice and reasonably honest and have a decent work ethic. One of the things I intend to attach is Milton Friedman's example of the pencil in describing its role how the free market works. So the free market is what is produced when people trade among themselves peaceably. By the way, trade also encourages cross-cultural contact, because sometimes some products only grow in certain parts of the world where people are different than they are here, see? And to trade with them, you've got to learn their language, they've got to learn your language, at least enough to barter with, at least enough to negotiate with. Now, the most primitive form of trade is barter. Barter is when you say, I've got a cow, you've got sheep. I will provide you with milk, a certain amount of milk, every day. You will provide me with a certain amount of wool every year. That's the exchange. Or, I've got a pig, you've got a bunch of chickens. You will provide me with eggs daily. In return, when I slaughter the pig, you will get a certain proportion of the bacon, of the ham, of the pork. You will get a certain proportion of the hide that I will send to the tanner. We will do a fair exchange so that both sides benefit. Now, barter works. But barter is a very primitive form of trade. In trade, there is always friction between the buyer and the seller. The buyer wants to buy a good product at the lowest price possible. The seller wants to sell the product of their effort at the highest price possible. This causes friction, like the moving parts of an automobile engine. If you don't have a good lubricant in that engine will seize up, catch fire, or explode. It won't work anymore. The same thing is true with trade. You need a good medium. Now, barter works in a primitive state of society. A primitive technology, primitive agriculture, subsistence, basically an exchange of goods and services. It works if everyone grows food or if everyone provides basic necessities. But you can't survive as a sculptor in a barter economy. You can't survive as a scribe or a lawyer or an accountant in a barter economy. Not really. And you can't survive as a teacher or an engineer in a barter economy. Those more advanced jobs are hard to translate into chickens and bacon and wool. You need a better lubricant than vegetable oil like you'd pour on your salad. You try using vegetable oil in an automobile engine, and you are begging for God to smite you with a car that goes belly up at the worst possible time and in the worst possible way. No, you need a good, heavyweight, mineral-based motor oil, petroleum-based motor oil. And that's currency. That's money. Because money, here's a definition for you. Money is a universal means of exchange. Money is a universal means of exchange. Money is a universal means of exchange. Money! I make money. I can buy anything I want or need with money. I don't need to worry about sheep, goats, pigs, bacon, or wool unless I want to buy those things, unless I want to sell those things for money. Money is that good weight petroleum based motor oil that's going to keep your engine working well for thousands of miles in the heat of the summer, in the freezing cold of the winter, and everywhere in between. Wet season, dry season, all of that. Money is what does it. So societies that become more advanced develop currency, coinage, or money. The earliest coins are called ingots. They're basically like little Three Musketeers bars or little Snickers bars that are made of copper or bronze or gold or silver or gold, and they're measured by weight. Then societies develop coins. They put the names of and faces of their kings on them, the symbols of their country on them, and minted coins become the rule of the day. But throughout the ancient world, minted coins are not valuable because of what they say on them. They're valuable for how much precious metals are in them. And that's important. Our money today is entirely symbolic. Bits of information in a computer file. Before that, bits of paper representing gold in a vault somewhere. Money has not been gold in a very long time. We left the gold standard in the early 1970s under President Nixon in terms of tying the dollar to gold. But before that, we didn't exchange gold coins much after the late 1800s. Early 1900s, cash money, paper money had taken over. Now, there is an element of trade that you should understand, and I will hope to have a clip about this as well, and that is dickering. Dickering is also known as bartering, and that can be confusing because barter is the direct exchange of goods and services for other goods and services. There's another definition for you. Bartering is the direct exchange of goods and services for other goods and services, just like money is a universal means of exchange. See, I do the hand motions to help you out. Dickering, otherwise known as bartering, is when people negotiate over price. Okay, I've got a horse. I'll sell it to you for, I don't know how much horses cost, $10,000. $10,000? You must be mad. That nag isn't worth more than $2,000. $2,000? Are you trying to insult me? I won't sell that horse for anything less than $8,000. $8,000? You think I'm made of money? I wouldn't consider paying anything more than $4,000 for it. And you end up around $6,000. That's dickering, otherwise known as bartering, but dickering is a better term since it doesn't confiscate things with barter. Still, trade, peaceful exchange of goods and services. Peaceful exchange of goods and services through negotiation, where both sides benefit. Now, there is something that I learned in the Brady Bunch long ago. Caveat emptor. If you remember your Latin and make Mr. Williams proud, you'll know that caveat emptor means let the buyer beware. You are responsible as a buyer for doing due diligence and trying your best to make sure that the seller is not a shyster, is not a liar, is not a user, a manipulator, or a false trader. There are various ways that you can do this. Today, we have governments that get involved and basically punish people for being slick customers, false traders, and so forth. But let the buyer beware. Okay, the military is another one of these complex institutions of society, just like trade, just like the law, just like family and basic government. So, what is the military's job? To kill people and break things in order to protect their people. To kill people and break things in order to protect their people. The skill set that a soldier has is the same skill set that a bandit has. They not only are intimidating, scary, and capable of being bullies, but they're also good at violence. Violence that will kill the enemy, and violence that will destroy their stuff. So what separates a soldier from a bandit? And the answer is a code of honor. A code of honor. A soldier takes an oath in the United States to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and to obey the chain of command. That oath makes the soldier a sheepdog. There are wolves, sheep, and sheepdogs. The sheep are most civilians who couldn't defend themselves to save their lives. They don't have the mental preparedness. They don't have the physical discipline. They are sheep. In this analogy, and it is an analogy, it's not necessarily completely true in all situations, but it is an analogy that I think has some merit. The wolf and the sheepdog both possess the capacity for real violence. They can scare the sheep, they can drive the sheep, they can kill the sheep if they want to. The wolf is selfish and predates upon the sheep. The sheepdog fights the wolf off and protects the sheep. That is what a soldier is. A soldier is a sheepdog. A soldier is a man or woman these days capable of violence in protection of society in the United States to defend the U.S. Constitution. Education serves one social purpose. Generation by generation, will a culture continue to be a group of people bound together by certain core beliefs? Or will the culture change those core beliefs so much that it becomes something entirely unrecognizable? Oddly enough, this election day, I personally wonder about that very question. To me and other conservatives, evil antediluvian conservatives that we are, the election on a national level is between preserving the constitutional republic as we know it or inviting a person to come in to change things and make it more modern. That's the nicest and most neutral way I can put it. We'll see what happens. And by the way, that assessment may be entirely wrong. We'll see what happens. But what education is designed to do is to transmit the skills and values of our culture to the next generation intact. That's our job. That's why we have schools. To transmit intact the knowledge, the ways of doing things, and the values of the American Republic from my grandfather's generation to my generation to your generation, and if you keep the work up, to your grandchildren's generation decades from now. That is the purpose of education. If a society does this job well, and they can do this through families, they can do it through churches, they can do it through government schools, they can do it through private schools, they can do it with completely private tutors. In a free society, education matters particularly much because in a free society, the people are themselves the rulers, as we're demonstrating today on Election Day. The people will decide the course of the future for the next few years, at least to a degree within the Constitution. If the people are ignorant of their own history and of their own culture's values, you could go off into cloud cuckoo land. Not that that would ever happen. So, education exists so that you all will learn how we do things in America so that you can carry on. Now you might say, but isn't that propaganda? No. Here's why. In teaching you about these things, I and strange other people like me will encourage you to learn about these things and think for yourself. You may take the revealed Western civilization that I am trying to transmit to you and say, oh, that's horrible. It's so misogynistic, patriarchal, homophobic, and unequal and racist that we need to change it all. Fine. I won't agree with you, but you're entitled to do that. But you've got to understand enough about the culture to think about it enough to come to the conclusion that we need to change it and reform it or replace it. Don't do that out of ignorance. Do that from a standpoint of knowledge, of understanding our culture and its history. But you may also decide that our culture is pretty darn wonderful and deserves to be preserved into the future and adapted to changing circumstances. And that's okay too. And I may personally agree with you. What you do with the knowledge of your own culture, its values and its skills and knowledge, is up to you. That you learn about it is up to me and people like me. That's why we have education. The alternative is a degree of social amnesia, where a culture becomes a victim of Alzheimer's disease, when the culture literally forgets who it is, what it stands for, what it likes and doesn't like, what its past is, and what its future was intended to be. I, like perhaps many of you, have had beloved relatives who've suffered from Alzheimer's disease, this horrible death of personality that occurs. I don't have words for how miserable and horrible it is. You don't want that happening to your culture. That's why we have schools. That's why we have mandatory public education up to the age, a certain age. So that everyone in our republic gets a fair chance to learn those things that we stand for, that make us Americans. And whether you go America, heck yeah, or America needs to change, that's for you to decide. The arts. Well, the arts is part of education. It's also part of entertainment. It's also part often of religion or ideological training, because the arts tell us stories and help us tell stories to one another that make our lives richer. Now, high culture in modern society are things like the opera, symphonies, plays that you attend live, literature that challenges you to think. That's high culture. Popular culture is the fast food of culture. It's what's fun, what's immediately gratifying, what's entertaining, whether it's in the form of a video game or of a movie or of a TV show or of a paperback novel. Now, you will note there's some snobbery in that definition. That's fine. It is a different feeling going to an art gallery than it is going to a wrestling match. That feeling is the difference between high culture and popular culture. But I will tell you that this hard divide that exists in our society between high culture and popular culture is fairly new. 120 years ago, you'd have coal miners who had read Proust, Marcel Proust, or who had read Nietzsche. Actually, 100 years ago, would they have read Proust? I don't know. I picked a fancy name out of the air. High culture is something that everyone who was aspiring to be something more than they were would try to learn something about. And so you'd have people from remarkably humble backgrounds who would study and learn about these amazing, sophisticated works of art or literature. High culture. Popular culture is like folk music. So, Ludwig van Beethoven, great Viennese classical composer, writes his magnum opus, the Ninth Symphony. And the last movement of the Ninth Symphony is the Ode to Joy. I could sing it, but I'm apparently tone deaf, or at least my tones are flat. I've been told this, so I'm not going to hurt your ears. That Ode to Joy, which is a piece of music every cultured Westerner should know, comes out of folk music. It comes out of a folk song, popular culture song, that Beethoven adapted. At least that's what I think. So, understand what the arts does, what reading does, what listening to music does. You as an individual and I can only be so many places and do so many things in our lives. In our lives, we have a finite capacity for experience because we're only around for so often, for so much time before we die, and we only can do so much. You may travel widely, you may stay in one place. We have one life that we know we can live. But what a good experience with pop culture or high culture can do is it can leaven your life experience with the experience of others. Learning about history and biography can broaden your horizons, showing you what other things in the world, other places in the world are like, what different people with different values think of the world and how they live their lives. Travel can do the same thing. But if you can't travel right now, you can read the accounts of somebody who has traveled or who has learned these things. What about dealing with questions of big events? I can tell you a hell of a lot of adults are really worried today because the United States seems to be so profoundly divided. Well, what do you do about difficult times? Maybe you read The Lord of the Rings, because The Lord of the Rings, at its heart, is the story of how very common, everyday people may need to rise to the occasion if the greater world enters crisis. Maybe you read a book. Maybe you watch a movie. Maybe you go to a play that teaches you a life lesson that you don't have to earn yourself. It may teach you something about God, about life, about politics, about values. It may inform or change your value system a little bit. It allows us to take journeys that our bodies don't have to go on. That's one of the things that art does for us. It allows us to wrestle with ideas and ways of believing about the world without actually changing your religious faith or your political affiliation in real life. You get to virtually journey through the world, experiencing it through other points of view, through other people's lives. Now, don't get lost in it. Don't get sucked into the magic mirror in Harry Potter or into the television screen in modern life or the virtual world. Live your life in the open air. Do things with your body. But you can experience things virtually through the arts, through literature, through plays, through drama, through music, all of these things, through graphic arts. You can experience things. You can also explore your creativity. You can be wild when you're naturally quiet. You can be loquacious when you're naturally not talkative. You can be outgoing when you're naturally introverted through art. So art can remind us of who we are, like education, but art can also allow us to creatively explore the world beyond our physical lived experiences. Now we're going to look at government. Government is a necessary evil. Government protects us from foreign and domestic enemies. It preserves law and order. A good government will do a hell of a lot more than that. A good government will allow us to be free, will encourage us to make choices, and will recognize that sovereignty comes from the people and the consent of the government, in my opinion. But I'm a member of a liberal democracy, a liberty-oriented, free republic. Now, what most people learn in schools is there's a scale that you can use, a scale of government. where communism is on the left and fascism and National Socialism is on the right. That's like Papa Bear and Mama Bear's bed or porridge. But right in the middle is Baby Bear's porridge or Baby Bear's bed, liberal democracy. That is the ideological scale of government. And it's what a lot of people teach and learn and think is real. But they don't call it the ideological scale of government. They just call it the continuum on which government happens. There's the left, there's the right, there's the center. However, that's based on what people say. The communists say that they are in this political business to make the world utopia and to give everyone equal opportunities and equal results, and from each according to their ability, to each according to their needs. Oh, how wonderful. And fascists, they're on the other extreme. National socialism. There's a master race and a bunch of servant races and a bunch of subhumans like the Jews. And there is this idea that force is something sublime and wonderful, and the exercise of force in war is something that helps teach people manliness, and all this other Nazi and fascist ideology. That's the ideological scale. That's what people say. And that's what most people learn, but it's not the only scale. There is the functional scale of government, and the functional scale of government is very different. Nazis and communists may talk very different games, but they act exactly the same way. They are oppressive, they are totalitarian, they run police states, and anyone who doesn't agree with them gets tortured or killed or turned into slave labor. The functional scale, on the one hand, you got anarchy, the absence of government. Whee! Riots in the streets, no private property, see, want, take. Anarchy, the rule of force, me strong, you weak, you do what I say, bam, bam, bam. No government at all, where the worst elements of society come out. By the way, I know that there are a bunch of intellectual anarchists out there. The old band Rage Against the Machine was big into anarchy. I think Muse is too. But they assume that the evil that men do comes from responding to oppression and responding to an oppressive legal system and government. They assume that if you got rid of all that, people would just become better, responding to the better angels of their natures. They're as idealistic as communists who believe that if you don't teach people evil, they'll never learn it, and they'll never be evil. They'll be incapable of it. This is a very idealistic approach. I've seen anarchy with my own eyes. In the summer of 1977, I was in my grandparents' fifth-floor tenement apartment in the Bronx, New York City. I had been watching a Yankee game, but my grandfather was getting ready to work. He worked third shift at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital in Manhattan as a member of their engineering staff. He was a maintenance guy, ran the HVAC system, worked in the boilers, all that stuff. So he left, he went downstairs, we could see the bus stop from the apartment, and we saw him get on the bus. He waved. He didn't see us because half a block away. He went driving off, and about 15, 20 minutes later, the power went down all over the city. Lightning had damaged the power grid in the north, to the north of New York City, and basically the entire power grid shorted out. So there's a blackout in the largest city in the United States. 8, 9, 10 million people. Now, there had been a blackout in 1965, the year when I was born. I was born in December of 65. This blackout happened in November. It was a cold time. It was a more civilized time. And 9 months after the 65 blackout, a bunch of babies were born. You can figure out what people did in the dark. But not in the summer of 1977. New York City was on the brink of bankruptcy. There had been neighborhoods entirely burned out by race riots during the late 1960s. And what happened was gangs of people disorganized, just took to the streets and started breaking into stores and looting everything. If you look up blackout riots, New York City, 1977, you'll see people running through the street shouting, "It's Christmas Day for the poor," as they're carrying television sets. Rap music is a product of this because the next morning you have some poor ghetto kids who have some of the best sound mixing equipment in the world, and one of the keys to the development of rap music is that moment where that happens. One of the heritages. I remember seeing across the trench of the Cross Bronx Expressway people gathering in the parking lot of what looked like, basically a mini mall across the way. And they started breaking into windows and breaking down the security gates and looting things. Our building, people took up baseball bats, hockey sticks, anything they could find, because New York has a bunch of strong gun laws. And if you're a law-abiding citizen, you don't have a gun. Criminals, of course, can get them because they don't care about the law. But we were ready to defend our building. I was a little kid, and I was 11 years old or so, and so there I was. I was going to help out because I was big for my age. Luckily, we didn't have anything. It was a tenement for working class people, and the mobs passed us by. I've seen anarchy. I've seen when human beings become a locust swarm, a mob. I hate it. I'm not going to lie to you. I am not neutral or unbiased about this. There's no doubt in my mind that if you take government away, you will have the worst kind of violence, terror, and danger. No one will be safe. And if you doubt, talk to anyone who's experienced any of these ongoing riots over the last year, and you'll get the word from them. Do your own research. Anarchy, on the one hand, too little government, the worst in each individual comes out. On the other hand, on the other end of the functional scale of government is tyranny. Tyranny is too much government. There are laws about everything. That's communism and Nazism and fascism all rolled up into one. Tyranny. Whatever they say they're going to do, they rule with an iron fist, and anyone who gets in their way gets squashed like a bug. There is no protection under the law. If you're a civilian or if you're a member of the military, if you're a member of the government, and you deviate one iota from the party line, you're going to get hurt. Bad. Because the government will not tolerate competition. The government in the tyranny is a jealous God. You will have no false gods before it. The government takes the place of family, takes the place of religion, takes the place of society. The government and its leader and its ideology is all, everything, all-encompassing, inescapable. That's tyranny. That's living in a human hive. Imagine living in a city with no doors, with no window shades, where everything that you do can be observed by passers-by. Imagine speaking a language without the word no in it, with an inability to do anything other than inchoately, when somebody is telling you that they're going to have you do something that you don't want to do, but there's no word for no. That's living in a totalitarian police state. That is living in tyranny. That is why every time socialism has been tried within the last 110 years, it's produced huge numbers of dead civilians killed by their own government in peacetime. From 1917 to 2017, well over 100 million civilians murdered in peacetime by their own government. That's tyranny. Whether the tyranny uses a swastika and has the Hitler salute and calls themselves National Socialists, or whether they are communists with the hammer and sickle and the salute of liberation. It is all the same. Between them is baby bear's porridge, liberal democracy. Liberal democracy has enough government to prevent street violence most of the time, and enough enough restraints on government to allow people to breathe and live their lives and make important decisions on their own. It allows people to agree to disagree and not all follow the same thing. It allows a society that is not a human hive. That's liberal democracy. And that's what we have. And it is a precious thing that you can't really appreciate until you lose it. So, that brings us up to the end of the end of lecture 1. Lecture 2 will begin, where we talk about the social order, and then we will go through various pre-classical River Valley civilizations. Thank you.